Hello, and welcome to Encounters with Polish Literature, brought to you by the Polish Cultural Institute, New York. I'm David Goldfarb, and I'll be your host. It's been just over 20 years since a teenager named Dorota Masłowska created an inflection point in the history of Polish literature with her novel that appears in English as Snow White and Russian Red, about speed addicts and smugglers from the former Soviet Union in a marginal Polish town, channeling the language and concerns of young people who may have been born under communism, but who don't remember it very well. They would have been entering kindergarten after the fall of the Berlin Wall and the historic roundtable discussions of 1989 to recognize independent trade unions such as Solidarity, revise the Polish constitution, and begin to establish a multi-party democracy and free markets in Poland. I've met Dorota, and she is a soft-spoken, reserved person completely unlike her outlandish characters. I once asked her which Polish writers influenced her or whom she most enjoyed. And like many Polish writers, she named the 19th century realist author of the doll, Bolesław Prus, for his compelling narrative and precise description. Our guest today off camera said to me that she's not a punk or a druggie like her characters. I think she puts all of her creativity into her writing, so she can lead a relatively normal, calm life off the page. Since her literary debut, Masłowska has published several plays, novels, many essays, and 2 rap albums that you can find in Polish, of course, on music streaming services such as Spotify under the names Mr. D and most recently Dorota. So now's a good time to reflect on that early success and to see where she's come since then in the past 20 years. Before we meet today's guest, I'd like to thank everyone who's been following along and supporting Encounters with Polish Literature. If you like what you hear on this program, click the thumbs up down below. Ring the bell to get notifications about new episodes. Follow the playlist of all of our episodes in the description of the program. Leave a comment if you can, and please click the subscribe button to show the Polish Cultural Institute New York that you are interested and would like to hear more. Remember that your participation reinforces our position in the YouTube search algorithm and that your active response will help the program rise in the search rankings so that more people can find out about Polish literature, its past and present, here on Encounters with Polish and now Ukrainian literature. Speaking of which, be sure to hang on and watch the credits at the end for some recommendations about where you can donate to support Ukraine and Ukrainians fleeing the war. Followers of the program will recognize today's guest, Benjamin Peloff, from our discussions of Wikatzy and Leopold Tyrmand in previous episodes of Encounters. He is professor of Slavic languages and literatures and of comparative literature at the University of Michigan, where he also directs the Center for Russian, East European, and Eurasian Studies, CREASE, and is a faculty affiliate of the Frankel Center for Judaic Studies and the Copernicus Center for Polish Studies. His books include Lost in the Shadow of the Word, Space, Time, and Freedom in Interwar Eastern Europe from Northwestern University Press in 2016, named the 2018 Best Book in Literary Studies by the American Association of Teachers of Slavic and East European Languages. Also 2 poetry collections and his orchestra from 2015 and The Politics from 2011, both published by Carnegie Mellon University Press. His poems have appeared in a wide range of periodicals, including Boston Review, Conduit, New American Writing, The New Republic, the New York Review of Books, and the Paris Review. He has translated about a dozen books and many shorter literary and theoretical texts from Polish, Czech, Russian, and Yiddish, notably works by Dorota Masłowska, Marek Bieńczyk, Richard Weiner, and Yuri Lotman. And he has received grants and fellowships from the Michigan Society of Fellows, the Stanford Humanities Center, and the National Endowment for the Arts, among others. Benjamin, welcome back to the program. So good to see you again.
It's great to see you, David. Thanks for having me back. It's always a pleasure.
Maybe we could start out by talking about, the phenomenon of Masłowska in 2002, 2003, when the novel that you translate as Snow White and Russian Red, the Polish and Russian War under the red and white flag, as was called in Polish, when like she just, kind of, it was a period I remember when it was like, it felt like, the end of Polish literature, because all of a sudden people were saying that like, okay, we don't have communism to fight against anymore. It doesn't make sense to be like writing between the lines and all those things that, that happened in the 70s and 80s. And there needed to be some new voice, and people were kind of despondent for a certain number of years, like talking about the end of literature in Eastern Europe. And then all of a sudden, Dorota Masłowska does something totally new and different. So what happened there?
You're right. She became something of a phenomenon. She was very young. She was 19 when she wrote this novel, which I happen to have the first edition of here.
I've got that one.
She wrote this novel while preparing for her high school graduation exams. I don't think that she had any intention of becoming this phenomenon. I don't think that she was particularly interested in the narrative about, because you're totally right, there was this kind of narrative about, what's the relevance of Polish literature now that Poland is an independent state and is no longer under the thumb of a Soviet hegemony. All of that, of course, those of us who follow literature in general, it doesn't have to be Polish, but anyone who follows literature knows how, frankly, dim-witted that kind of prognostication tends to be. It tends to assume things about the past that are incorrect, to assume things about the present that are incorrect. And that was the case here. But she wasn't trying to change that, I don't think. I think that she was writing something that came out as through her own talents as a highly accomplished literary text. But its ambitions thematically were something much more rooted in a reality that I think anyone can relate to. And that's the sense that in a post-Cold War world, we were all sold on false promises about how, well, now our problems are solved. Poles were sold on it. And it was part of that sell was selling them into or selling them out to systemic corruption, because they didn't have to worry about the communists anymore. So pay no attention to what's going on in the state, right?
Right.
It meant that the youth, in particular, felt themselves sold out in a fairly literal way to a hyper-capitalist culture that recognized their value only in terms of their consumerism, whether as consumers buying or as contributors to a consumer culture through management. So there's even a passage in this first novel where there's a very heartfelt kind of monologue about the anxiety of Polish youth simply being raw material for Western capitalists, either to be plucked out of Poland to become a manager who speaks German or whatever for a German firm doing business in Poland, or in a more extreme version, there's a part of that passage it expresses the fear that Western countries are simply going to come in and harvest our organs. And so there is this deep-seated anxiety about what we're actually supposed to do as a society when the promise is, oh, it's okay, just buy stuff or sell stuff. And if you don't actually feel that that's who you are, then it seems like the society no longer leaves a place for you. So there was that theme that this novel really taps into very strongly. There is something less durable that it also taps into, and that was this the culture of the so-called tracksuit warrior, the kind of low-level gangster, hoodlum, hooligan type called dressage in Polish. And there were a number of novels in the early aughts, actually starting in the late 1990s, a number of popular novels sort of about these ne'er-do-wells who wear their, ersatz Adidas tracksuits and go around doing whatever. And this novel,
the new form of the youth culture of Tirmand that we talked about in our last discussion.
Exactly. And this was lumped in with that, even though that's actually not the case. This is I think that was a fairly convenient way of understanding the main character of this novel, who does sort of wear a tracksuit, etc., but he's not really part of that subculture so much as trying to find his way through a society that's given him no reliable scripts, but has only sold him jargon and slogans and catchphrases.
And it seems to be like on multiple levels. What struck me on this reading was just how profoundly anti-sentimental the novel is. That that there is no kind of the West isn't a positive model. This main character is not doesn't is the opposite of the kind of Polish romantic hero. He's not Konrad from the Forefathers Eve Part 3 at all. He's not. There's nothing there. You can't trust the police. You can't trust adults. People can't trust each other. There's nothing. There just aren't positive, any kinds of positive models, it would seem. I don't know.
Well, that's the case. Although the protagonist of this novel also finds himself, because you said he's not like Konrad Wallenrod, he's not the great romantic hero of Polish literature, and specifically Polish nationalist literature. But there is, in a not very subtle way in this novel, a direct critique of that kind of symbolic nationalism. Because part of the narrative of Konrad Wallenrod and this kind of Polish romantic nationalism is that once Poland becomes a sovereign state, well, its problems are solved. Because we had gone through, in Polish history, we had gone through very, very long stretches in which the dysfunctions of Polish society could easily be lobbed off on the foreign oppressor. Oh, it's there, once we get out from under the yoke of the Russians or the Prussians or the Austrians, then we'll be in control of our own destiny, and then everything will be solved. And the fact of the matter is that's not the case. So that in this novel, when in a rather phantasmagoric way, the city decides that it's going to express its Polish nationalism by literally painting all of the houses red and white in the colors of the Polish national flag.
Yeah.
The protagonist is just as confused by this. So wait, now we're going to celebrate our nationhood, and yet that doesn't solve my problems. That doesn't show me how to live. That doesn't save me from the social dysfunctions around me. And that's a big part of the critique in that novel. And I would say it actually is a theme that runs throughout Dorota's work. I was trying to think, in advance of this conversation, I was waiting, if you were to ask me the imaginary question, what is the overarching theme of Dorota Masłowska's work? And I would generally resist that kind of question anyway. Yeah. But I do think that there is an undercurrent in much, if not all, of her major texts that is the theme of a deep and irremediable loneliness that comes from trying to live out the script you've been sold on, only to find that no one who sold you on it believes it in the first place. That thinking, just be a good Polish nationalist. No, that doesn't do anything. Just buy these products that are in this yoga magazine, which is a big theme in Dorota's most recent novel to appear in English, Honey, I Killed the Cats. The idea that, just live the life that's sold to you in this glossy magazine. It's all a sales pitch. It's all false. And so there's this sense of loneliness in the lack of authenticity. People just want to learn what am I supposed to do? And you even get that, in fact, in the last passage, the second to last passage of Snow White and Russian Red. I should have.
You want to read?
I can, yes. At the end of the novel, which does end multiple times, because Masłowska takes us from within the story world by stages. She takes us within the story world of the novel back out to her reflection as an author. And it kind of occurs in stages as she's disconnecting from the hero. The hero at the end of the novel is in a hospital bed, or what seems like a hospital bed. Because,
all right, wait a minute, hold on. Maybe we should go back and say, how did we get here? So
that's what I was about to say.
So how about giving the plot summary?
Okay. So Snow White and Russian Red is a novel in which a young man named Silny in Polish is translated as nails in English. He's a young man who is addicted to amphetamines, and he is simply navigating a breakup. That's really the whole point of the novel, is that he's navigating an unhappy relationship that has just ended. The novel begins with him learning from a mutual friend that his girlfriend is leaving him. And this sends him down an amphetamine, say, accelerated spiral in which he's trying to make sense of his life. And that means making sense of his romantic life, making sense of his social life with this cast of very strange and equally misdirected or directionless friends. The shadow of a mother and a brother who are mentioned repeatedly throughout the novel but never appear. And then ultimately his attempt to assert himself, to become himself by the end of the novel. Only it fails, in part because he's so jacked up on speed that reality starts to blend with fantasy, until it becomes clear that the fantasy that his reality is coming into conflict with is actually the reality that we live in. So that by the end of the novel, he decides he's had enough. He wants out of this story. And so he literally crashes through a wall. And in the end of the novel, we find him in a hospital bed, interacting, as it were, back and forth with the actual author, Dorota Masłowska, whom he has encountered. At the end of the novel, he encounters a character who is taking down a police report after he's been arrested. And the person taking down the police report is a character version of Dorota Masłowska. And as this breakdown between the fictional world and the author's commentary sort of progresses, the main character essentially is on life support and dies because he's being disconnected. And so he has a moment of a kind of flash of awareness that his consciousness is just a subset of this author's consciousness. And he breaks through that barrier at the very end. So this is just a passage from that section of the novel toward the end. And in this section of the novel, he doesn't refer to Masłowska with a Masłowska, which is her actual name. He calls her Masłowska because that's how someone who is maybe not very careful in their enunciation and frankly speaks in this more of a street register, this is how he speaks. So that simply becomes her name in this passage. And he says, "What, Masłowska? Isn't it so? Now you're so smart. You're sitting there and looking yourself over, perhaps to bring you the sun here and hang it under the ceiling and put a drink with a little cherry into your hand. You're looking yourself over like as soon as there's something, you're yelling right away, 'Mother, mother, bring the fly swatter. It's moving.' And maybe it's some other way. Maybe what's lying here in the bed is just my representative for Poland. Maybe what's lying here, maybe it's only my demo tape. Maybe I feel something too. And since you can't even comprehend that for yourself, pop out to the kiosk for 3D glasses and then come back. Because under my back, a room extends for kilometers into the heart of the earth, tangles of cables and transistors. Don't look because you'll drown. Don't touch because you'll lose your hand. Seriously, where you live, girl, you don't get anything. If you want to pass that whole business, then you'd simply better go buy yourself a study guide for reality, plus a free tear-out crib sheet, and then we can talk. You storm into me here. I can even quiz you, sample questions with a photocopy of your ID. Pay attention because they're trick questions, socio-political background. Is the Polish-Ruski War just a documented historical fact or a set of occasional prejudices? How does the collective hallucination evolve with respect to wars with the imagined enemy? Sketch out an appropriate diagram of the function. Is what you're holding merely a common pen? Explain the concept aloud. Phallic symbol. What kind of significance obtains in its inscription? Zdzisław Storm. That's the name inscribed on a pen earlier in the novel. Provide an oral explanation for the term. Capitalism. Advertisement. Joint stock company. The hero's positions on the background of their life course list the features of their character and appearance. What is the animalization of literary characters? To what purpose is the main hero's outlined vision of death realized? List the premises of New Age philosophy. Define the term cylindrical clasp composition. Assignment for an A+. Present the theory of literary subtext in the form of a diagram. And do you also have a subtext? Justify your answer. At a local disco, you meet Satan. What do you say? React spontaneously to the assigned situation. And in this, near the end of the novel, you can actually hear her, Masłowska, absorbing the task that is before her as she's writing the novel, taking her high school exit exams.
Yes.
Only she has now applied it as a series of questions that the hero is asking the author about what the author has written about the hero.
And she's also kind of, this is like, there are a number of like kind of Gombrovichian moments in this novel. And this is definitely one of them where like in the diary, in Gombrovich's diary, he's often like trying to preempt the critics, or, he leaves all kinds of landmines in Transatlantic. And I think there's a lot in common between this work and Transatlantic, where, he'll say one thing and he'll say like the completely opposite thing later. As if just to make sure that he can't be pinned down. And I think that's kind of one of the things that, that she's doing, imagining, all right, how is anyone going to read this? Right. And these are all the formulas she's learned in high school, which is pretty advanced, compared to the formulas that I learned in high school. I mean,
I think she's dressing it up quite a bit. But
yeah, she's dressing it up. But it's good. But it's good, and we should also say what the Polish-Ruski War is about, right? I mean that there's this is no Ruskies Day in the town where this takes place. So
yes,
there's all you. I guess you mentioned that there's all kind of festivities around anti-Russian sentiment.
Yes, which is again, and it's never clear in the novel. Is this part of an amphetamine? Because he's on amphetamines for days at a time. He's at the end of a really serious bender, and it's unclear whether these are part of a hallucinatory mishmash of what he's heard and thought and seen, or is it actually something that's going on? It's not 100% implausible. It is absurd, but there are these strange like events or activities that one can find in the Polish countryside where some local politician has come up with this kind of idea. But what is going on in this novel is specifically an anxiety, a repeatedly articulated anxiety that that the East, Russia, which just, there's no distinction here between Russians and Ukrainians and Belarusians, etc. Just people from the East are bringing falseness in the form of counterfeit cigarettes, counterfeit CDs, things that you can buy at the bus station, right? From people who are hawking these on tables and blankets on the sidewalk. And so that's one of the things that the end of communism has brought, just flooding the market with fake stuff. And then for the authenticity, if you want the real thing, well, you can't afford it.
Yeah.
Right. You can't actually buy it. You don't have enough money for real cigarettes. You don't have enough money for real CDs. What you have is you get something that is, as she says at one point, chocolate podobne. She refers to in an essay this sort of pseudo chocolate. That was a common feature of the communist era. Well, how is that any different from the pseudo cigarette and the pseudo CD and the pseudo DVD and all of these things that flooded the Polish market after the collapse of communism?
Yeah. So like, let's think about a moment about like, what, this Gombrowiczian language. I mean, I think that's another kind of thing that, thinking across, Masłowska's works, that seems to be, a constant. This, I was thinking of it as, what kind of thing can you call it? And it was kind of like, this sort of ecstatic riffing, I mean, that she'll start on some kind of theme and then just, let it go. And eventually it kind of builds up and there's a kind of a rhythm and a climax that, Miłosz would call, the kupa in Gombrowicz, that everything would end in some just huge mess. Right. Yeah, and that's something that Masłowska has. If I was thinking of this one passage in Honey, I Killed the Cats. Do you want to read that one?
Sure.
Since you're the translator, I mean, I could read it, but you
sure. I'll say, since we're talking a little bit about language, the people who are tuning into this will hear a difference between the language of this novel, which is deliberately more accessible. It's written in a stylistically simpler way than what you just heard from Snow White and Russian Red, because Masłowska is quite a virtuoso at stylistics, and her first couple of novels are highly stylized in their prose, and this is something that is misunderstood or there's no way you can read this novel and think that this is what slang is supposed to sound like, because it's not slang. But there are nevertheless some critics say, oh, this is slang poorly executed. It's not slang. It is an entirely artificial language of her creation. And there's a good reason for it doing what it does, and we can go back to that. But you'll hear a contrast in this, which is much more accessible. You can't say, like, maybe these young folks don't have a knack for science, but when it comes to fashion, they really know their stuff. Just take a look at the latest Zac de Boom collection they're wearing, called Holy. You can guess why. Little Pilgrim Girl. She's the one inseminating the imaginations of the designers this season. Louboutin has put out a series of brain-twisted pumps inspired by non-pinching orthopedic sandals. And Vivienne Westwood says they go great with thick white tube socks with an emblem of crossed tennis rackets at the ankle, or else just bare feet covered in leprosy and bound in a checkered handkerchief. This season, hair is supposed to be unwashed, quote-unquote unattractive, obligatory, makeup that gets greasy, dry lips, if at all possible, swollen from kissing a crucifix, slight self-mutilation. From a distance, you'd think these are some crazy-ass chicks who've crawled here on their knees from Lord to announce the word of Christ, but when you look a little closer, from between their polyester lips, you see pearly teeth worth more than your soul, nay, than your entire shitty existence.
Yeah, that seems like that's in a novel that is much more kind of it seems much more edited to be readable. Then this is like one of those paragraphs where she's kind of letting loose, yes, a little bit. Yeah. She has sometimes she lets the dam open a little bit. She loves to do these formal projects. I don't like to call them experiments. I think she knows what she's doing. She's not playing around, but, where the novel is written in a form of prose that echoes and to some extent parodies
a received genre. And in many ways, Honey, I Killed the Cats is sort of her YA, her young adult novel, but for adults. It's written more or less in the style of a YA novel. Just as you could take her, this is a book that I have not translated, but her How I Became a witch or a hag, as subtitle an autobiographical narrative for adults and for children. She does these things sometimes where she's deliberately writing in the style of a children's book, but it's absolutely not a children's book. It's not thematically appropriate. It's stylistically much more sophisticated. But she loves to do these things that are imitating a certain style. But I do want to get back to the Gombrowicz and language.
I just to tell a small anecdote about this. I mean, I remember when the novel first came out, and I'm pretty sure it was before your translation appeared. I was doing a small independent study with some graduate students on translation, and one of them wanted to take up, Wojna Polsko-Ruska, the Snow White in Russian Red, as you called it. I mean, in the first place, it's one of those things you read because it's this kind of, long, strange trip that you're constantly getting disoriented. And I have to go back 2 pages and say, so who's speaking now? So where are we? So what are we talking about? And then, you kind of reread it and then you kind of sort it out. And then you go, it takes 3 times as long to read as you think it will. Then like that question of slang, we were trying to figure out, is it slang? I mean, it's not slang that, the graduate student was somebody who was, went to Poland frequently. He was a heritage speaker. So felt he should be in touch, but, this isn't, this, maybe I'm too old already. He was thinking. He himself was, that, but what is your take on that? I mean, that it's not slang, that it's her own invention is another way around that, I think.
Yeah, well, but so what I just said about her doing these kind of prose echoes of received genres is actually something that places her very much in the lineage of Gombrowicz, because Transatlantic is itself a take obviously on the Polish Gawenda narrative style.
Right.
What Masłowska does that's a little different from Gombrowicz is that Gombrowicz loves to, once he chooses a particular style like Gawenda, this sort of raconteurs style of versified narrative that you get from the old Polish nobility, he leans into it so that he makes his Gawenda sound even more Gawenda than any Gawenda, right? Yeah. Masłowska, in a sense, goes the opposite direction. She takes language that she has heard and she splices it together so that in any given sentence, and literally you can do this, if someone who wants to really do a linguistic analysis of this novel can do it, although it would be laborious, because in any given sentence, you can pull 3 words that came out of an advertising jingle, and the end of the sentence will be a crypto quote of some local politician. And then it'll have peppered into it these little slang phrases, some of which were contemporaneous from the early 2000s. She was a teenager. She knew what people sounded like. But some of which are actually anachronistic and drawn out of literature, so that in any given sentence, you see the sentence will jump registers very often 2 or 3 times within one line. And that's not slang. That is as though you were to take a very sensitive radio antenna and play all of the frequencies at the same time. And that's that's actually in that particular novel, in Snow White and Russian Red, that is part of the thematics as well, because this is a character who listens but doesn't know what anything he hears means. So it all kind of clumps together. He hears contradictory information between what an ad tells you to buy or what kind of pleasure to have, and what you hear from the Catholic Church, which is a different sort of sales pitch telling you the opposite of all of those things. Sex sells here, and it tells you not to buy there. And both of those realities coexist in any sentence in that novel.
Yeah, I mean, it's in some ways it's an aesthetic of sampling.
Yes, it is very much enough so, in fact, that I would point out that. Sorry, I'm looking around because I have many Masłowska books stacked up around here, but here, this is the first edition of her second novel, Pav Królowej. And at the end of this novel, she didn't do it in the first one, but at the end of the novel, she has a very interesting note in which she says that this text of the novel contains crypto quotes and travesties of the following authors. And she lists them with the page reference, simply giving credit where due. It's nowhere marked in the text itself. You would actually still have to find, oh, this is the line that she pulled out of this source. This is the line she pulled out of that source. And the sources are themselves a fascinatingly diverse hodgepodge of classic mid-century Polish writers like Marek Łasko and Witold Gombrowicz, but also more recent post-communist spoken word artists and poets like Marcin Świetlicki, who was one of the writers who initially discovered Masłowska, as well as, Jim Morrison, as well as Sidney Pollack and Doda Elektroda, electronic musicians from the 90s and early 2000s.
Right.
And she's pulling the things you would hear either on the street, what you're listening to, the radio, political sloganeering, advertising jingles, but also the texts that one reads as her own literary forebears. They all get mishmashed into the same text.
And is it, I mean, I know that you've been working a little on this, on translating this text. It's one of those things I was trying to think about, the translatability of it. I mean, of course, there people say some things are untranslatable, and there's some people say nothing is untranslatable. I lean on the nothing is untranslatable side, but myself, but at the same time, I'm thinking, what would it take to make, Pav Królowej? First of all, how do you like to translate the title?
Dorota and I are kind of on the same page for the project of translating this novel. What we don't have is a publisher. So if there are any publishers interested in this project, please reach out to me.
There are some who watch this program.
I hope so. No, I have projects. I'm attracted to projects that people tell me are not translatable, because I fall very hard on the side that anything that can be articulated in human language can be re-articulated in human language.
Absolutely.
So that doesn't mean that my translation would sound the same as yours. And quite the contrary. I don't want it to be yours. It's my version. And what I had proposed to Dorota is to produce something out of this book that would speak to English language audiences in a sense analogically. The novel Pav Królowej, and we should say that Dorota Masłowska's first novel, Snow White and Russian Red, received the Polityka Prize, which is one of the top literary honors in Poland. Right. And then her second novel, Pav Królowej, received the Nikkei Prize, which is the absolute top honor in Poland. So it was a case, I remember after the first novel came out, there was a lot of skepticism, including my own, that this was a one-hit wonder. This was a phenomenon. This sort of thing just sort of, sometimes lightning strikes and it doesn't strike twice. Yeah. That's fine. And in fact, she had been writing some things for the popular press, sort of short journalistic pieces that were not especially promising at the time. And then I went to a reading in 2005 from this novel as it was still in draft, and left that reading completely blown away, because this is a novel that is, again, about commercial culture and fame, in fact, and the promises of fame and what the reality actually turns out to be. Set in Praga. Praga is the eastern part of, as you know, of Warsaw, which at the time she wrote this was a kind of a more of a hipster domain, lower rents, so younger people, and a center of Warsaw's youth culture. And so she writes this novel that's about hip hop and youth culture, both the reality of it and the commercial illusion of it, and how they disagree. And she sets this in Praga, and writes it in rhythmic, semi-rhyming prose, so that it imitates the rhythm of hip hop. It's not written in hip hop, but is written in a way that if you read the novel out loud, which is the way it's designed to be read, you hear very strong rhythms and rhymes that make this into a kind of almost like a gawenda, like a long lyric narrative. And so my idea was to produce a version of this that would eliminate me entirely, and that we would, instead of having it in Praga, where there are a few, Praga specific details that are easily transcribed to the, say, more déclassé parts of New York City, which is a place where she has spent quite a bit of time. And in fact, Honey, I Killed the Cats is set in a kind of dream version of New York City. And that we would, instead of calling it the Queen's Peacock, which is a literal translation of the title, although one could just as easily render it as the Queen's Vomit, because pav, peacock, is also a slang term for vomit.
Right.
We were simply going to title it Queen's Peacock, set it in Queens, just over, same sort of thing, on the other side of the river from where the rich people are, although that has gradually changed.
And there are certain parts of Queens that are very fancy.
Exactly. Now there are, but but we were going to call it Queen's Peacock, and have the author listed as Dorothy Butters, aka Dorota Masłowska, because her name means Dorota is Dorothy and Masłowska is Butters, and we would just translate the entire thing, including the author's name, and present it as an American book. And the only place you would see translated by would just be in the copyright page. I would just write myself out of it. And this was an idea that we had, and that I had and kind of sold her on. But we've never found, or I've never found, a publisher willing to take it on as a literary collaboration.
You need somebody very adventuresome to do that. And one thing though, as I was thinking about this, and is like, one issue is like, would English language rap lyrics work as a novel? Like, if you didn't hear them in the rap, but you tried to read them off the page, some of them would, and some of them might not. And I think that that's got to be part of the challenge of translating this, is translating it to something that's going to be credible at the end. Yes. That won't feel like, because of course a lot of rap lyrics you could put on the page and they would sound too sing-song or something like that, but or maybe the lyrics wouldn't be that interesting under that kind of close examination without the context in which it was originally presented. And here we have something that's like it starts out of context in a sense, or the context is different.
Yeah, but Dorota is often doing this in a somewhat confrontational manner. We think we know what hip hop's supposed to sound like, and then we hear this and we're like, it's not. We know what slang's supposed to sound like, and we read this and we're like, that's not quite right.
Yeah.
And it goes both ways. So one of Dorota's more recent novels, which I have here in the original Polish is inni ludzie, other people,
right,
which is also written in hip hop verse, although in this case it's actually written out as verses. And as you can see, the book itself is designed in this form that makes it look like a cracked CD case.
Yeah.
Right. And it is. So am I supposed to be reading this as hip hop lyrics? No. Just as Dorota Masłowska is now the author of 2 albums,
right,
that are done as hip hop albums. And when people hear them, they complain that it's not really hip hop. No, it's not really hip hop. It is a literary composition that is done in multimedia. And it is done in a way that is recognizable as not hip hop. That's the point. Everything that she's doing is echoing a genre, but doing it in an off-kilter way. Mm-hmm. I was just having a conversation with a mutual friend of ours, of mine and Dorota's, in Gdańsk, who was laughing about the reception of Dorota's new album, which only just launched last month. Yeah. And she was saying that the people who are listening to it, some people think it's a brilliant artistic project, and others.
This is the one called Wolne, right?
Wolne, that's right. Yeah. Where she has changed her lyric persona, her hip hop persona, from the first album where she's Mr. D.
Yeah.
And now she's a different persona. And these projects also involve, of course, the albums themselves, which you can hear on Spotify. Or that you could buy in a music store, but they also include often very elaborate satirical music videos, and as well as this sort of persona of in with that first album, Mr. D, that she puts on, but she's not that outside of that album. I mean, she's not, when you go talk to her or see her at a reading or attend a talk that she gives, because she's a public figure. Yeah. She's not dressed the way she is in that character.
Well, even, there was I remember when the novel or not the novel, the album Wolne just came out, which means free. When there was an advertisement in Times Square with her picture, mm-hmm. And it said Dorota underneath it. And I'm wondering, is that our Dorota? Because she looks very different from how I'm used to seeing her look. It's and I'm wondering, is that just a stylization that somebody else did? Is that some producer's rendition? Is that her? Is that her own kind of imagination of her character in this album? It's probably some of both. But for anyone looking, I mean, she's Dorota for the new album, right, and Mr. D for the earlier one.
That's right. And I think the answer to that question is yes and no. I mean, she has style.
Yeah.
And you would know that encountering her in person. But it is not the packaged style. In fact, one thing that she is most consistent in her work is pointing out all of the ways in which the surface appearance is a deception, that it's a sales pitch, that it is often mendacious. I think about this a lot. Actually, there's a deep moral core in this project of hers that I think runs throughout her work, and that is a critique of, frankly, of adult society. Mm-hmm. Or society that perceives itself as mature. And there's another connection to Witold Gombrowicz, who right, was always pointing out how much immaturity is in what we think of as mature culture. Mm-hmm. And with Dorota, that critique is, and this is something I've latched onto quite strongly as it relates very much to my own life, is this disconnect between living in a world where, as children, our parents and adults around us tell us, don't lie, don't lie, don't lie. And we say, yes, you should never lie, it's wrong. And then as adults, we're told that if we still say you should never lie, it's wrong, oh, you're naive. right? That there is a way in which the moralities that are imposed upon children, that in fact are very often right-minded, I would say, are actually used to control other people. And then when we try to live up to those ideals as adults, we're told what idiots we were for believing in them in the first place. And she's does this not just with questions of morality or social code. She does that too, but even in terms of products. You said this would work. It doesn't work. You said this would remove wrinkles. All it does is make me feel how wrinkly I am. Right? This need that we have to answer our deep felt psychic wounds with some salve that then only turns out to be an even deeper wound or to cause a deeper wound. This is something she's always coming back to.
That's a good place to end our discussion. To go full circle. We don't have time to get to the plays, but that's okay because on June 2nd, there was a launch for a new edition of 4 plays by Dorota Masłowska, organized by the Polish Cultural Institute in conjunction with the Siegel Center for Dramatic Arts or Theater Arts at the City University of New York. So I will recommend that we'll put the link to that in the description, so that we also have a full discussion of Masłowska, or a more full discussion of Masłowska this year. But before I let you go, let me ask you what's next for Masłowska on your agenda, or what new projects do you have?
I always have a bunch of things that I'm working on, or in some cases that are publication ready, and I just sort of wait for the right editor because, frankly, because I'm really attracted to things that are either obscure or just impossibly difficult in some way. I do want to do Queen's Peacock if I can find, but it's just too massive an undertaking to do blindly without having some place for it to land. And it's a complicated collaborative project where I would need a good editor who would be willing to push back on some of my choices. Beyond that, I've translated quite a few of Dorota Masłowska's essays, which I think are brilliant cultural critiques of post-communist society. They're often very, very funny. She has a ridiculous sense of linguistic humor. And I've also started to translate other people, inni ludzie, which I would like to also complete. But that said, my translation of Honey, I Killed the Cats is fairly recent. This came out, in fact, during the pandemic. It's copyright 2019. Right. So it was it still feels very fresh to me, but I'm always working on some little thing out of Masłowska's work, and as well as translating Marek Bieńczyk and others whom I've continued to translate, and some wonderful Polish poets, Andrzej Sosnowski, Bianca Rolando, Krzysztof Jaworski, Marcin Sendecki. I'm always kind of plugging away at these things and hoping that someone might take some interest, but to be quite frank, I do it mostly for myself.
Mm-hmm. Well, thanks so much for joining me again on Encounters.
It's been my pleasure, David. Thanks for talking.
Hang on. Please subscribe and click the bell to receive notifications about new videos from the Polish Cultural Institute, New York. Go to the Polish Cultural Institute's website, linked in the description below, to see a full schedule of upcoming episodes. Stay tuned for the credits for some recommendations about how you can support humanitarian aid for Ukraine and for Ukrainians fleeing the war in their country. I'd like to thank all the people who helped make this series possible. The Polish Cultural Institute New York sponsors our program. Bartek Remisko, head of Humanities and Literature at the Polish Cultural Institute New York, suggested the series and is our executive producer. My fellow producer, Natalia Yudin, handles all the video editing, technical, and aesthetic aspects of this production. Claudio Fuendraber, head of communications at the Polish Cultural Institute New York, keeps us all informed about upcoming episodes of Encounters with Polish Literature and other events organized by the Polish Cultural Institute New York. Our opening and closing music is by Radek Przedpełski. Thank you all for listening and for reading along with us. Let's meet again in a month when we'll be discussing Nobel Prize-winning author, can you guess it? Władysław Reymont, with Anna Zaranko, translator of his monumental novel, The Peasants, recently published by Penguin Classics. See you then.
Jest to szary dzień, jak zawsze w tej okolicy. Cała sceneria dodaje się chwytlanej fotografią z ilustrowanej gazety. Tak szare, tak płaskie są domy, ludzie i pojazdy.